Okay, Dr. Maya, first I'd like to thank you a lot for giving your time to this talk with me. I think people of Brazil will be very happy to hear you, since we didn't have your exceptional book yet here. I hope we get, because the message is very strong. So let's start. I will do some questions and this talk will go on. So, unfortunately, most people in Brazil haven't had the opportunity to read your book, and it hasn't been translated to Portuguese yet. So, could you tell our audience how a personal journey of you with your son became the foundation of the idea of the dirt cure? When did it all click in you? How was your story?
Well, I always like to say that way back before I went to medical school, I was already interested in kind of out-of-the-box view of healing. And I had actually seen a special by a person here on integrative medicine, and they talked about a story of someone who was doing neuropsychoimmunology. And I thought, I love that. I'm going to go to medical school, and that's what I want to be, a psychoneuroimmunologist. And then I did my training, and it turned out there was no such thing. And so, but really what I found in my own family was that, you know, over the time of my training, I actually lost my connection to those ideas that I was interested in, because I think, as you know, there's a lot of information coming at you all the time. I would even argue maybe a certain amount of brainwashing that happens. And then I feel like my son, I had 3 children, one in medical school, one in residency, and one in my fellowship for neurology. And so my 3rd child, my son, came, as I said, sort of a spiritual teacher to remind me of where I was going, where I had always intended to go. And so he, on his 1st birthday, developed asthma symptoms. And he was breathing very, very quickly. We were actually in the middle of a hurricane here. And we had to, in the middle of the night, run out to a 24-hour pharmacy to get him a nebulizer. It was really, honestly, it was terrifying. I mean, he was still a baby. And, you know, over the next weeks and months, he stopped gaining new words. So he had been a very early talker, but he stopped progressing in the way he had been progressing. He started to fall more, and he stopped catching himself with his hands. And, you know, as you know, that's a developmental reflex, and he lost it. And he would just fall and smack his face into the ground, and he had scrapes on his head. It was a very scary time, particularly as a pediatric neurologist. And of course, we went to the pediatrician, who was prescribing lots of medications, antibiotics, steroids, inhalers, and, you know, none of them really helped very much, but certainly none of them were going to stop this from recurring. And we went to many doctors, and everybody sort of said, well, I think he's okay. It's not a big deal. He's a little delayed.
Let's wait.
He wasn't like that before. You know, he was progressing very quickly, and, you know, he didn't have asthma before. Well, we'll see, you know, he's okay. So ultimately what I realized was I had to do my own investigation. And when I did that, I discovered that he was severely allergic to soy. And taking him off of soy, which happened after 10 months from when he first had this you know, precipitating event, within 3 days, he stopped having breathing issues. And that was it. Every week before that, he had a runny nose all the time. He was coughing, breathing quickly, and it was like every other week. And I was missing a lot of my fellowship. My husband was a resident. He was missing a lot of his training. And ultimately, stopping soy made a dramatic difference. And what I learned from that was a few things. One was that the food we eat has a tremendous impact on day-to-day health in terms of wellness and illness. And I learned also that food and the inflammation that may come from eating food actually impacts the brain, which I don't think at that time was accepted at all. We knew a little bit about the gut microbiome, but very few people were talking about the gut immune brain connection. Now it's much more common to hear about it. So those were things I learned that were dramatic. And on the other side, I also started to think about food. And that was a huge education, because in medical school, we learned so little about food, how it's grown, why it's important. But I learned about GMOs, I learned about pesticides, I learned about how to prepare foods, that soy is not usually eaten just plain, you know, but it's usually fermented traditionally. You know, that there were a lot of things about how food was grown that were completely invisible to us, and that made a huge impact in health.
So I think the idea is, we use it to say, you are what you eat, and I learned by the book that you are what you ate.
Yes,
so,
right.
It's very important. Really, here in Brazil is the same thing, because we have little training in nutrition in the medical school, and even in the pediatrics residency. And we are seeing the sides changing with pediatrics, and a lot of colleagues interested in this kind of the importance of the food, the gut, the connections with the brain. I think it's a new start, because we are seeing new diseases, very difficult to deal with the diseases, and I think we have to have this dirty cure. We have to reconnect with nature, and your book is all about it. And so, what's the main ideas behind the dirty cure? Is that excessive cleanliness is really bad?
Well, it's you know, when I talk about dirt, I'm talking about three big areas. One of them is being exposed to germs and microbes, another fresh food from healthy soil, and the third is being connected to nature. So it's not, when I say dirt, I don't just mean, you know, getting dirty, being, you know, in the mud or the soil, though that's a part of it, but more that, you know, we've become very sanitized in the way that we interact with the world. And that is, people think like, well, we're just going to avoid it. That's going to keep us safe. But the problem is that many people don't realize, and that includes doctors, that our bodies recognize, that our bodies experience that avoidance and that sanitization as actually its own danger, its own risk. And it's sort of like, I think the example that I use in the book is when we interfere all the time between the natural world and a child's body, it's like your child learning to play the violin, and you slap their hand away every time they try to practice, you know, or you bring in another person to do the practicing for them. This is not going to make your child a good violin player. And this is what we're doing with children's bodies and with their immune systems. We're saying no germs, no fever, no exposures, no soil. We're sanitizing the food. We're actually blocking their ability to even have nutrients in the way that they used to. And we're, of course, letting them be on screens or keeping them inside for school all day long, and then homework all afternoon or evening long. So all of these things are creating a different kind of experience for that child, and it changes their body and their brain.
Yes, you talk in the book about the terrain, the importance of this base, to do this base of health, and I think we lost a lot of this to understand that the terrain is mainly about nutrition, and that this dirty cure begins in the pregnancy. because what the mother eats in the pregnancy, and now we saw these epigenetic signs and that we can modulate even the mode of birth, the breastfeeding. We are in the World Week of breastfeeding in this week, and I think it's our most important food that we have to be exposed since the first moment of birth. And I think terrain is all about this. But we are pediatricians, we make people fear of germs, and now we are giving them bacteria, and I think it's a little bit scary for us and for them. And I think if we say in the office, "Oh, I'll give you a bacteria supplement," they became a little bit worried. But on the other side, we have a lot of prescription of antibiotics, and we know that this can do a lot of things in our body. So how can we improve this kind of immune dysfunction caused by bad food and bad habits and bad lifestyle, excessive use of drugs? How do you think we can improve this terrain of our kids?
Well, I think I would start by saying, you said that terrain starts even in pregnancy. I would say terrain starts even before, because a lot of times we focus so much on the mother, but actually it's the mother and the father together who are creating this epigenetic terrain. And not only that, but the microbiome during the pregnancy. If mother and father are together during the pregnancy, it's changing the microbiome of the home, of the people, of the baby, because we know now that even the placenta is not a totally sterile entity. It's actually got its own microbiome, even through the pregnancy. So I agree. I think, mother and father need to be thinking about their terrain. And the terrain is something which is both internal and external. So internal terrain is our body system, our organs, our blood, and our microbiome that's inside our body, both in our nose and mouth and throughout our gut, even on our skin. The external terrain is the world around us. It's the natural world, it's the soil, it's the sun, it's the water, all of these things. And then where health and wellness or illness live is that interaction between, that balance between internal and external terrain. And food in particular is the embodiment of the external terrain made internal, becoming a part of our own internal terrain, which I think is such an intimate and sacred and beautiful connection that we have with the external world. So, this is, I think, a very special relationship as far as terrain. When it comes to the bacteria, as you're discussing, I have found that patients are very amenable to the idea of probiotics. Oh, we're taking bacteria in pills? Great. That makes perfect sense. I find that, I don't see people reluctant. Where I do see a lot of surprise about how the organisms around us, these microorganisms, are changing our bodies, is actually when we talk about things like parasites. Right now, people are actually using parasites or parasite egg to treat autoimmune conditions, both in the gut, like Crohn's disease or colitis, as well as they're even looking at, multiple sclerosis. They're looking at asthma. They're looking at autism, and thinking of they're looking at celiac disease, which is a very interesting connection. And there's recently a paper that came out that showed that when people with celiac disease were experimentally infected with hookworms, their diversity of their other gut flora increased tremendously and made it more possible for them to eat wheat and gluten, which is unbelievable, right? That we are in this sort of it's almost like a symphony, the way we're in relationship with these organisms and how they change our organisms and our bodies. So that's something that surprises people. Another thing that surprises people so much is actually fecal transplant, right? So this is actually becoming a standard of care treatment in academic medical centers around the world, where people who have, let's say, a very severe infection of the digestive tract, Clostridium difficile, which can be deadly, particularly in the elderly or in, young people, people who are immunosuppressed, they are using fecal transplant through enema and through capsules. Okay, this is stool, and it is absolutely effective in treating. So effective that in a study that was done in Scandinavia, they actually stopped the study because it was considered unethical to not be giving the fecal transplants to the controls. So these are things which tell us that bacteria and viruses and these complex organisms, what is more biodiverse than stool, right, are actually so critical for building the immune system and making it actually stronger and healthier.
Yes, recently